Welcome to HomeWord. I'm Jim Burns, and I'm smiling today. We have Doug Fields back with us. We're going to talk about the first few years of marriage, but don't go away if you've been married for longer or you're not married, because there's some great content that we're going to communicate on. In fact, Doug and I wrote the book, The First Few Years of Marriage, and when we wrote the book, we said, wow, everybody should listen to this content. Everybody should read this content. But for the first few years, so many times we see couples who are in those first few years and they don't build a foundation on their marriage. They were doing great in pre-marriage, and then they got busy and they got distracted. And next thing you know, they're looking up saying, wow, our marriage is in trouble. And that's a lot of times when marriages are in trouble. So if your marriage is not in those first few years, this can still be helpful for you. But then, send it to somebody that you know that's been married for only a shorter time. As I mentioned, I'm very excited to have Doug Fields back with us. We had him on the program a while back. We talked about intentional parenting, how to be an intentional parent. So good. But today we're going to talk about marriage. And Doug does a Marriage Matters event once a month at the Irvine Church called Mariners. And what's amazing is it brings over 1,000 people every single time. Loads of people come. And I talk to people, because I'm in that area too, who just tell me that they love hearing Doug, and they love his humor, and they love his ability to communicate. I honestly have said behind his back that he's one of the finest communicators in the country, and I believe that strongly. In fact, the first time he spoke on marriage that I know of was at an event that I was at, and I was sitting on the right-hand side of me was my wife, Kathy, and on the left-hand side was his wife, Kathy. Yeah, we both are married to Kathys. And in the middle of the talk, I said, oh my gosh, I hear all kinds of marriage content. I think this is the best marriage talk I've ever heard. I'll tell you at the end. And then it became that. I can still tell you what it was on. It was a long time ago, but it was so good. So what a privilege to have him. He's been married to his wife, Kathy, for a number of years. They've got 3 adult kids and a host of grandkids, and they do family and they do marriage right. And I have great respect. I was Doug's youth pastor, but what's funny about that is now that we're more peers, I actually see him many times as even a mentor in the field of ministry. So I love Doug. Welcome back.
Oh, thank you so much. And you say you see me as a mentor. I know you're saying that because we're going out to lunch afterwards and you're going to want me to pay.
Oh, if you would do that for the first time in our relationship. It's been 40 years, but yeah, that'd be great.
That's true. I do owe you a few lunches.
Gee whiz.
It's great to be here. Let's talk marriage. I love it.
Yeah,
I love it. And you're right, Jim. This content in the first few years of marriage, we were given kind of the title of this because we wrote a book called Getting Ready for Marriage, and they thought this was the next one. But when we finished, we're like, this could have been a general marriage book. There's so much in it. But it is so important for couples to start out their marriage in the right direction.
No, you're right. And what happens, and I mentioned this in the opening, is that a lot of times couples drift in those first couple of years. And I get it. They're busy with their jobs. They're, maybe making a baby. There's just loads of things going on. They drift. What you say is they need a course correction.
Well, every marriage drifts, right? Every marriage drifts. So it's not a matter of will your marriage drift. Yes, it will. Even if you're newly married and you're thinking, oh, we'll never drift. Yes, you will. You're going to drift. But the key to a healthy marriage is making those course corrections, and that's what we talk about. So if you don't make the course correction, a drift over a long period of time, you're going to totally miss the goal and the destination that you had intended before you even said, I do. So really what we talk about in the book is a lot of the course corrections that couples need to make.
Yeah, and sometimes they don't sound very spontaneous or romantic, but they're needed. Right at the beginning of the book, we said a phrase, and I love this phrase, and I think it's your phrase. A healthy, happy marriage is a choice, not a coincidence. I mean, it sounds unromantic, but that makes sense. How do you do it?
Well, I mean, everything is a choice, right? And those that want a spontaneous, carefree marriage, it's not going to happen. You're at your happiest. This is based on research. The high point of marriage is when you first get married. And then there is a natural and normal decline in what's called relationship satisfaction. And so to keep it at a higher level of relationship satisfaction, we have to make some conscious choices. I'm not saying you've got to, quote unquote, work on your marriage, but you kind of do. Meaning that nobody wants to come home after a long day of work and work, right?
Right.
We'll work some more. Oh, that sounds fun. I got to do that until death do us part. Like, good night. Why did I even get married? But there's an intentionality behind a healthy marriage that we're going to make some decisions that put our marriage in a healthier spot than we would be if we just let it carefree.
Right.
Now, when you're dating, there's a lot of romance and a lot of excitement and a lot of this is new and fresh and no, you hang up. No, you hang up. I could listen to you speak all night. I'm just going to lay next to the phone. There's all that courtship that gets us to this point of I do. And then what happens after the newness kind of that wears off, it's not in a malicious or even an evil way. We get distracted. We chase other things. Like we chase each other before we get married. And then when we get married, we chase a mortgage, we chase our kids, we chase a career. There's other things to chase, which leads to the drift.
No, and that makes sense. So we need a course correction. You tell couples to laugh daily, date weekly. Talk about that.
Well, I always think there needs to be more laughter in life anyway. A lot of people just if your marriage gets bland, it's going to be boring. And so I think just look for laughter. When you taste a little bit of laughter, you crave a little bit more. When I'm in front of crowds, I will say, how many of you believe that your marriage is worth 1% of your time? I'm just going to lower the bar to 1% of your time. And of course, everybody raises their hand, right? Well, 1% of your time is 15 minutes a day or about 100 minutes a week. And so that's what we talk about in the Date Weekly is, okay, if your marriage is worth 1% of your time, then 1% of your time is 100 minutes a week. We'll round it down because we're nice guys. So 90, an hour and a half, no rollover minutes. If you go, you can't subtract that from the next week. Right. But all kind of relationship science points to the fact that people have increased relational satisfaction when they spend isolated time together. And there's a million excuses, Jim. You and I have heard them all about why you don't date and marriages don't date. And then all of a sudden you wake up and you've been married 10, 20, 30 years and you haven't been on a date. Right. And it's why we have such a high divorce rate of people married 25 years or older because their whole marriage was based on their kids. Yeah. So laugh, look for opportunities to laugh, be together. You're going to laugh not when you are at home at the kitchen table working on your marriage. You're going to laugh when you're out, when you're on a date, when you're walking around, when you're going on a hike, you're trying something new. So yeah, I believe, and you have modeled this. You're the one that you've been married 50 years. Congratulations, by the way.
Thank you so much.
50 years of marriage. Good night. But I would say, just observing your life, don't you think you guys have had a date night, let's say 45 of 52 weeks of a year?
I would say that, yeah. Yeah, we made that as a conscious decision because it wasn't happening.
Right.
And Kathy even said, actually, I was your youth pastor at the time. And, after a youth event, we were having a meal and she said, I don't know if we should have kids. And I went, what? And then I had to say to her, well, I am having an affair, but the affair isn't with a woman or a man. The affair is with my mistress is my job. And we made a decision to date weekly. And that honestly has changed I think that's changed the trajectory of our marriage because when we date, we have fun. We like each other. We just sometimes don't like each other if we're trying to work on our marriage or doing the bills or doing all the monotonous stuff. And there's monotony in life.
Yeah. And you've got to prioritize. And I tell couples this because you say date weekly, immediately freak out like ideas and what should I do? And does it always have to be creative? And if you plan one date a month, you plan one date a month, your spouse plans one date a month.
Right.
Then you have one default date. Like our friends, Duffy and Maggie, they have a default date. They call it Chicken a Flick. They go to Chick-fil-A and to a movie. Okay, that's their default date. Okay, and so you plan one, your spouse plans one, you have a default date, and then you have an at-home date. So now really what you're doing, you're only feeling the pressure one time a month to come up with something to do for 90 minutes. Yeah. And if you don't have the budget, then you go on cheap dates. You trade babysitters, you use duct tape to keep them at home or, whatever it is. Like there are other people. I mean, every excuse we've heard, Jim, of why they don't. And it can be tragic on your marriage. And a date is a course correction.
Yeah, you're right. I was aware of there's a couple who used to come to our Refreshing Your Marriages, and maybe they still do. I haven't seen them for a while. But they said when we challenged them to do that, they said they made a commitment and it changed the trajectory of their marriage. They were actually going toward divorce, and they tell me this every time I see them. How cool is that?
I love it.
Yeah, and it wasn't some deep thing. I kept thinking, wait, no, we said deep stuff, and we talked about this and that, and they went, no, you just said to go do a date. We can do that, and they did, and they're in a better place now.
That 1% is super palatable. It's realistic, and I would even say this on the date time, and it doesn't have to be night. It could be date day, it could be date morning. It's just 90 minutes, you two together. Yeah. But you're not talking finances. Right. You're not talking calendar, and you're not talking about your kids. Right. It's just you two, and just make that off limits. Have another time for that. That's Monday afternoon or whatever. Yeah. Have your calendar and your finance meeting. But when you date, you do what you did before you get married. Good. You pursue each other. You chase each other. So good. I have heard you say that busy people are broken people. I would say busy marriages are broken marriages. We're talking about this. We say, well, we don't have enough time to do that. But in the book, you have a whole chapter that you wrote more than I did on it, and it said, slow down. Yeah, Jim, I think this and phones, I think, are the number one issue related to marriage right now. Wow. I think people are every excuse you hear is we just don't have the time for it. But the reality is, the one thing we all have in common, people listening, we don't make the same money, we don't have the same ethnicity, we don't have the same backgrounds. But one thing anybody that's listening to this right now, we all have in common is 1,440 minutes a day. So we've got to figure out how do we manage that time. And so every time I say yes to something else, I'm saying no to my marriage. So I got to make sure that if I'm saying yes to coaching a little league team, or I'm saying yes to serving at the church, or I'm saying yes to all these many opportunities that are out there. We're not people who lack opportunities. Right. We lack discernment on what to say yes to and what to say no to. So many of you're saying no to your marriage because you're saying yes to many things, and yes is always what gets us busy. When Kathy and I look at our lives and it's a little out of control, if we kind of hold it up to the mirror, we said yes to that, we said yes to that, we said yes to that, and that has made us too busy.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's difficult. Kathy and I went out to dinner last night with a couple, and then we get a call from some very special people in our life, and we went, let's do it. I'm flying tomorrow. She's actually flying tomorrow. We're going separately. But, we kind of regret. I kind of regret having that, saying yes to another dinner meeting. Yeah. But it's our choice. We could have said, no, can we put it off? But we said, no, we want to be with you. And now we're looking at it kind of as drudgery instead of enjoying.
Yeah, and I think you have a go-to. When it becomes, I talk about a date time being sacred. Then you can always say, I would love to do that, but we have something planned that night. Yeah. You don't have to say what it is. But if you want to, great. We're investing in our marriage. And investing in your marriage could be a financial investment. Yeah. It could be, you're going to sacrifice. You have to sacrifice to have a healthy marriage.
Yeah, and I actually think as leaders, and we have a lot of leaders listening all over the world who are listening to this podcast, and what I say, I tell people, hey, it's Kathy's my date night. I remember a time where we had a very famous Christian leader who you know very well, and they happened to be in town. They lived on the East Coast, and they were speaking at a big church, and his wife called Kathy and said, hey, do you guys want to do dinner tonight? And she said, no, it's date night. So I didn't know this. So she says, hey, I had a nice call with, Peg and, blah, blah, blah. And I go, so we're going to dinner with them? She goes, well, no, it's our date night. And I was like, the boundaries that she had, because there would be thousands of people who would want to go out with this couple.
Yeah.
They invited us.
Yeah.
And
and that's why you've lasted 50 years is because she holds boundaries and she knows that date time is sacred, and you're willing to give it up for just a
So that's why she likes your talks on marriage better than my talks.
Well, I understand. That's but hilarious. Date, laugh, be together, everything. When you dreamt about marriage, you weren't thinking, someday it's going to be boring and stale and it's going to lack excitement and be no fun. No, that's not what you thought. You thought this would be so fun to be together. We're going to be married. Well, you've got to be intentional to keep that fun and laughter in your marriage.
Yeah, you're so right. Now, Kathy and I, we've been married longer than you, and we dated all through college, and we got married. And what I really liked about her when we were dating began to bug me. It was called differences. So I'm an extrovert, she's an introvert. We go through these different things. And that's the case with you and Kathy too. And we both married above ourselves. We've said that several times. But what do you do when your spouse really is different? How do you embrace the differences rather than attack the difference.
Yeah, well, I mean, we've all heard that phrase, like differences attract, you're attracted, and then when you get married, they attack, right? Because you've settled in, and you're like, oh, it's not as cute as I thought it used to be.
Right.
I think it goes back even big picture, not that we're going to trace it all back to sin, but let's do that for a second. Like, you are imperfect, and you married another imperfect person. I tell people, like, you're a nutball, and you married a wacko. So you got a nut job and a wacko trying to live together. You're going to have some chaos and some differences.
Yeah.
And I think really it comes to attitude. You're the king of this, Jim. You've got such a positive attitude about so many things. But I tell couples, you change your attitude, you change your marriage.
Yeah.
You really do. You just become so negative. So I think you gotta. It starts by being thankful. So you be praying, thank God for your spouse and how he or she is different from you. You celebrate those differences instead of attack those. And one of the words that I've inserted into my marriage vocabulary for the last few decades is the word minimize.
I like that.
I just really try to minimize some of the things. And I'll tell you where this came from. Kathy had this weird habit of finishing toilet paper and leaving an empty roll out. Like, it's done. And there's actually toilet paper sitting nearby that she could have just picked up, put on the toilet paper thing. I timed it. It takes about 8 seconds to do it. And I was like, it's so weird. Like, she is,
what's wrong with that?
Yeah. Well, I start running through my mind this list of, what an awful person that she is, that she didn't replace the, toilet paper roll. And then I actually hear her and the kids laughing in the other room.
Right.
And I thought, my kids adore her. She's incredible. And I just started thinking of all these silly, wonderful things about her that I love so much. And I thought, really, you're ready to have a fight because for the 9th time she didn't put the toilet paper roll on.
Right.
And so I'm like, who cares? Like, just come on, minimize that, Doug. That's not worth it. Like, if you want to be angry and mad and frustrated, you could be that 24/7.
Yeah.
Because you're imperfect and you married another imperfect person.
I mean, I've heard you say, does it really matter?
Yeah.
And sometimes in our head, I've done that where Kathy and I have been in some kind of even a conflict, and I walk out the door and I kind of go, okay, does that really matter? It doesn't really matter.
Yeah, it bugs me, but it doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
I think that's a great filter. I use it all. I mean, we've been married, this will be our 40th year. And I use that a lot because it really doesn't matter. And it, in the grand scheme of things, there is so much more positive than negative.
Yeah, and some things matter. I mean, adultery matters, abuse matters, addictions matter. But really, so much of what we get all hassled about and really takes us down the wrong course of our marriage is something that what are we doing? Why do we really care?
And there are things that matter. I mean, you went to an extreme, and those things do matter. But there are things that bug you, and you obviously have to address those.
Yeah,
like,
it's so good.
You shouldn't be on your phone when we're in bed or whatever it is. Like, we got to talk about those things. But there's a lot of differences that they're really not that big a deal.
No, it's good. I think that's really helped Kathy and me in our marriage. What's one of the things that's really helped us is that we kind of do that. Does it really matter? And there are some things that still bug her about me, and there's things that bug me about her that we probably still need to work on. But it really has helped us, solidify a marriage that, for us, both coming from somewhat dysfunctional families and whatnot, we didn't know how to do this.
Yeah.
And so we have found that that's a biggie. Another one, and I love how you talk about this, and you really have done some research on this, is positivity toward your marriage. That when you work on the positivity, people who have a positivity toward their marriage do much better. Speak to that.
Absolutely. Well, like I said, I say, if you want to change your marriage, be more positive about it. I was out for a run one morning, and I went, more of a jog. Run indicates speed. So I was let's say I was walking fast as I was eating a donut. And I walked by this lady, and she said, and I wasn't in a very good mood. I'm not a morning person. You and I are different, Jim. Yeah. You're a morning person. Yeah. You
have to embrace your differences with me.
That's right. You wake up and you're like, good morning, God. I don't. I wake up like, good God morning. You're happy in the morning. I'm still trying to wake up from a coma. And so I wasn't in a very good mood for whatever reason. And I was out jogging, and she said, good morning. And just the way that she said it, I started thinking about good morning. First, I thought she looked like Mary Poppins. This has gone off the rails. Sorry.
To get inside your brain sometimes.
Yeah. Well, then it was like a spoonful of sugar, and I couldn't remember what the spoonful of sugar was.
Yeah.
I just know that I like Trick cereal. But she said good morning, and the more that I jogged and ran, I started thinking about all the reasons that it was a good morning, and by the end of this time, I totally changed my. I mean, it's so dumb. That's a dumb illustration. It's so simple, but just the phrasing of good morning and me thinking about all the reasons that it was good, it totally changed my attitude. So instead of thinking about all the reasons that your husband is not good or your wife is not good, go back to the list of what you love about them, and maybe even begin a list. You know, you don't anymore. You don't even have to journal it. Just put it in your phone in the notes section, like things that I love about Kathy. I mean, we didn't talk about this, but I actually have a notes page on my phone about things that I love about Kathy. You're calm. You love our kids so deeply. You love Jesus. You're secure and don't try to prove yourself. You're funny, even though we don't admit that to you. You're adventurous. You're present. You're fun to be. Like, I have this list. You're looking at it right now on my phone, and it's long, and I just add to it all the time. So there are times when before I go in the house after a long day, or we were arguing about something that didn't matter before I left. Yeah. I'll just sit in the driveway and just read this.
That's a really good thing.
And just be reminded of what an adorable, wonderful, incredible, wacko woman that I married, who married a insecure nutball like me.
Yeah, that's really, really, really good. And it's being proactive. I did that for Kathy. I wrote 100 reasons why I was thankful. And I noticed the other day, and this has been a couple of years ago, that it's in her drawer. She still has that. And I thought, how interesting.
Of course. That was meaningful to her. You don't read that and throw it away. Oh, Jim, that's nice. Trash.
Yeah.
I mean, let's talk about, you're the pro at this. Talk about Gottman's research on 5 to 1.
Exactly. He calls it the magic ratio.
Yeah.
If you have 5 positive interactions to 1 negative interaction, then, he's never seen a marriage go down. When you're even 1 to 1, and some marriages are the opposite, more negative, that's when you're in trouble in your marriage.
Yeah.
And so it goes back to what we were saying before. Some of that positivity is going and having fun. We're going on a big anniversary trip here, and I'm really excited about it. I'm just excited about hanging out with her, but I'm also excited about having fun, going on walks, longer times of romance, all those kind of things. And if we're ever needing a course correction, those kinds of things help. Now, you can't always go spend 2 weeks, in a beautiful spot, but you can do these little mini trips.
90 minutes.
Exactly.
90 minutes a week, Jim, is all it takes.
No, so good. Hey, we're going to take a quick break, Doug. And when we come back, we'll talk about fighting fear. I think you have some great stuff on that. Doug Fields is with us. We're talking about the first few years of your marriage. If you want more information on that book, you can go to HomeWord.com and get information. You can go to the show notes and get all the information on Doug Fields. DougFields.com is where you can get a lot of his resources, and really, truly, just one of the, as you can tell, one of the great thinkers and communicators in the world today. We'll be right back. We're going to talk about fighting and conflict and how we deal with our own fears on that. We'll be right back.
Hey, I'm Kelly Fellows. Did you know that HomeWord also has resources for parents and married couples? You can find all those resources at our website, homeword.com. Also, check out our YouTube channel, where we create 1-minute video vitamins to encourage parents and to resource couples. Check those all out at YouTube/HomeWord and also our website, homeword.com. Now let's get back to our podcast.
Welcome back. Is this not just a great conversation? It's so motivating. I'm actually thinking of people that I could send this to without trying to be preachy at them, because great input. Doug is always so helpful, practical, fun. We're talking about the first few years of marriage. And by the way, there's a course for individuals, a course for groups, small groups. Maybe you have a small group at your church and you want to look at marriage. Well, the course is great. It's a lot of Doug and some of me, and it's just helpful in any way you can when you start thinking about making course corrections. It's those little things that make such a difference. Okay, let's talk about conflict and fighting. Okay,
that's fun.
It is, but you think a lot of it has to do with fear.
Yeah, let's back up. Conflict is inevitable. All right, and we know by research that it's not like healthy marriages have less conflict, right? That healthy marriages might even have more conflict, but they know how to deal with it
right.
in a positive way. So conflict is inevitable. Misery is optional. And so when I talk about fear, what I'm talking about is that I think most of the time when Kathy and I get into some argument, it has triggered a fear that I have. And I think a lot of us have all different types of fear. My fear is I'm not going to be good enough. I could go way back into the psychosis of where that comes from and being raised in a wonderful family. But if I came home with an A, it's a little bit harder, could have been an A+. And, if I had went 3 for 4 at a game, if I was a little faster, I could have stretched that double into a triple. Like there was just always something that
Actually
could
went to a couple of your games. I don't think you ever went 3 for 4.
That's true. That was all an exaggeration. But so when I think about like my script, anytime I feel broken, it goes back to I'm not good enough. That's a fear. Other people's fears are fear of rejection, fear of failure, fear of being lonely, fear of being unimportant or disliked or powerless or unwanted. So a lot of conflict isn't really, that's surface, like whatever we're going to argue about, it triggers that fear. And then when I have a fear that I'm feeling unwanted or I'm not good enough husband, then I might respond in such a way that actually chases Kathy's fear. And Kathy's fear is being unwanted. So, I mean, you talk about like my fear is I'm not good enough. And so I'm not a good enough husband. Then sometimes I go silent, which then triggers her fear of being unwanted. And our fears just kind of chase each other. So I think it's important to understand that in conflict, to take a step back and say, okay, what is this fear that might be unearthed in me? And is it a common fear? And then I can just say like, babe, that I struggle with, that I'm not good enough. This is pushing that button. And there's a wounding there. And then when Kathy becomes empathetic to that wounding, she says, oh, babe, it has nothing to do with me feeling like you're not a good enough husband. I was just disappointed or whatever. We can talk about it once we know what that primary fear is.
That's good. And, conflict is neither good nor bad. It's going to be there. So if you can work on your conflict, it actually draws you closer together is what I hear you saying.
Yeah, absolutely.
No, that is so key. If we move it to love languages, my love language is affirmation. So when Kathy's critical to me, and you got to be in a marriage sometimes, but when she is, it's actually more wounding. And I had to explain that to her. Yeah. So since my love language is affirmation. If you're giving me criticism, you got to know that you're killing me on this. And that's not all that. I mean, she has to sometimes be critical or negative toward it, but she has to be careful because that's not going to help us.
It's just more explosive. If you're a words person, that criticism stings a little bit more. Right. It's more explosive when it hits.
I often say that communication is a learned trait, but actually marriage is kind of a learned trait. You can have a more intimate or more connected marriage, but you got to learn some of this stuff. And that's why it's good to, listen to the podcast. It's good to read books. It's good to do this kind of stuff because I tell parents, and I know you do too, parents and couples, read one marriage book a year, read one parenting book a year. And it's not like there's only one book. It's just, it's going to help you. And why do we not work on this? And work doesn't have to be like, drudgery, but, read a book together. Read it. Kathy read a book to me in the car while we were driving, and I listened to it for part of the time. I'm still thinking about from our previous conversation about just a spoonful of sugar. So I've lost some of our conversation.
I get it.
I'm trying to get that music going.
I can't get that lady out of my mind. Hey, if this triggered something to somebody who's listening, we unpack this in a whole chapter in the book on fears because it's a little bit heady in terms of a lot of times when we argue, we're arguing over sex or finances or the children having sex for finances or whatever we're arguing over. That's at the surface level. We got to go underneath that surface because we always point to, we have the same arguments all the time about money. No, you're maybe having the arguments about money, but it's really what's underneath, what's lurking, what's keeping you from finding healing is you haven't identified your primary fear, and your response is chasing his or her fear.
You're right. So we have to learn I bet you most of the people listening would be benefited by learning their primary fear.
Yep.
That was really helpful for me when I first started learning that stuff. Now, you mentioned the word sex, and of course, you always talk about sex. So,
how many books have you written on sex, by the way? Because I haven't written one book on sex.
you just talk about it all
there
the
you
time. When every marriage
You
conference.
put it into a print.
Yeah, like I speak on sex in marriage. You just bring it up on everything. So I give the talk, and then but yours is it's spice for everything. We're going to talk about finances today, and then you give us illustration on sex. But we digressed. We actually need a course correction. So let's talk about what you called have great sex. You said sex is a thermometer to a healthy relationship. What does that mean?
Well, I just think it's an indicator of intimacy. It's not the only indicator, but for I would say 90% of the people that are listening, there's a 10% that for whatever reasons cannot, function in that regard of physical sexual intimacy. But for most, it is an indicator. It's a sign that there's still some passion and interest and physical affection left in the marriage. Right. And so I would say that even if, you mentioned earlier that I'm speaking to 1,000 couples every month, and I have them write me letters. You and I haven't even talked about this, and we talk about everything, but I would say this last year I've been shocked at how many letters have come in from what I would call sexless marriages. Yeah. That the flame has disappeared.
Right.
So I think, and most of the time, it's not a physical issue. It's an emotional issue. Yeah. Something has happened between them, and they're allowing that to, be their new reality.
Yeah. No, that is so good. I actually, in April, I did 2 marriage conferences. One at a place called Windshape, which is the Chick-fil-A Foundation World in Atlanta, and one at Mount Hermon. Kathy and I spoke, and in both places, people told me a story. One had not had a sexual intimate relationship for 12 years, and another one was 14 years at 2 different spots. And so I gave them some input, and I said, what do you think about that? And the woman said, well, that's exactly what Gary Chapman told us at 8 years. And I thought, well, you probably need to put this into practice. They're still together, so they want to be together. So and like what you say, it's not usually the plumbing issue or whatever. It's actually more of an emotional thing that they need to work through. And, the Bible says where there's no counsel, the people fall. In the multitude of counselors, there is safety. Sometimes hard to go talk to somebody about this, but it's important.
Yeah, and we talked earlier about the drift. I mean, think about this. If you're in a marriage and you're drifting, you're just 1% off course. Yeah. So maybe other things are working in your life, but this physical sexual area is not, you're 1% off course. Yeah. Over a long period of time, that 1% becomes miles. And so now all of a sudden you're like, oh, we haven't dealt with it that last year. Like, you just got to get some help on that. Yeah. You got to talk about it. Jim, you've even talked about, I've heard you speak about scheduled sex because it doesn't sound very, spontaneous and sexy, but, why don't you address that for him? Because I think that's a real practical
what's interesting is it's coming out in all kinds of research now that people who are struggling at finding the time, if they schedule it, it actually helps them and they look forward to it. Their intimacy is better. And, I used to just kind of talk about it teasing, but the fact of the matter is now that I'm looking at more research, the more research I look at, the more people who actually say, hey, you know what, it's Friday night, it's Sunday, it's, whatever it is, they actually have developed a more excitement. And you know what it does is if you schedule it on a certain date, then it actually causes you to want more intimacy throughout the week. So it's kind of a good thing. We don't have much time, but I want to talk about one issue that we addressed. And it surprised me when we wrote this chapter and we looked at the research and it was on making babies when a baby arrives. Marital, making babies when babies arrive, one of the greatest experiences and joys of our life, but at the same time for both men and women, marital satisfaction went down more for men than for women. Speak to that. What are practical ways we can do that? And again, we don't have much time, but I want you to speak to that. You have such good ideas on it.
Well, I think the reality is that I find that for men, you mentioned it goes down. It's because they're now the third person in the relationship, right? And so many people are caught off guard that way. I've got 3 grown married children, and I let all the guys know, like, you're going to feel like an outsider for about a year. Yeah. So there is a lot of difficulty with that, and it's very real to be in a marriage and not feel like you're wanted there. So one, you got to just address the reality. It's going to feel like that a little bit little bit. She's not avoiding you. She's just exhausted and tired, and she's the only one that has the proper plumbing to make sure that baby stops crying. So, just reality going into it with children, you're going to be tired all the time. You're going to have some struggles and some troubles. But Jim, it goes back to what we talked about the first time. You have to make time for each other. Right. So I would just say, get babysitting, get help, get an in-law, get somebody to take that time where no matter what, you have to invest in that one-on-one time with one another.
And I think that's so good. Even when you're going back to the date night issue of, keep investing in your marriage, even when and I get you're going to be tired, so it's not going to be this amazing experience, but give each other time. You give others time during that time. So make sure the baby's taken care of, and then put some energy into that, even if it's not 100% because you are exhausted in those first few years. Exactly.
I have 7 grandchildren under the age of 10, and I'm looking at these couples, my kids, and they're tired all the time.
Exactly.
They're tired all the time.
Yeah. No.
So they have to work on that, and they've got each other to help out with babysitting. They've got mom and dad. Now, not everybody has those luxuries,
right.
But don't make excuses, make investments.
No, that is so good. I love that. Don't make excuses, make investments. Thank you. Great conversation today.
You're welcome. It's
Doug
fun.
Fields with us.
We're done already?
Yeah, we are done.
Gosh.
We could go on, but people have other things to do.
I get it. People are busy.
And you and I are going to go to lunch right now anyway.
That's right.
So great
you're
to be
pay like you always do. Thank you.
Great to be with you. And hey, before I go, let me just say, if you'd like more information about Doug, his ministry, who he is, what he's doing, you can go to dougfields.com. We've got all the information on our show notes. And you can pick up this book at homeword.com or anywhere books are sold. And there's a course with it. So, take advantage of this. Great input. And right before we go, let me just say, you know what? If you're in those first few years, that there is great hope for you. And people in the first few years who make good decisions and make those course corrections, their marriage will thrive by persevering. Their marriage will thrive into, I just went through my 50th wedding anniversary. I know I sound so much younger, but, I'm an old guy. And I don't think we would have made it if we didn't make some pretty major course corrections those first few years. Honestly, we made major corrections in those first few years, one being a date night. And I don't think we would have made it with those decisions and having Christ in our life.
That's right. Well, I'm glad you did make it.
Yeah. Well, I am too. And now I'm grateful, and cost me a bunch of money to buy 50 long stem roses for Kathy.
Oh, you invested in your marriage.
Yeah, I did, but it was a lot more expensive.
Quit making excuses.
I thought it was a lot more expensive than I thought. I'm just kind of whining about it, but I hope Kathy doesn't listen to this. Actually, she liked it a lot, and I spent the money. Anyway, great to be with you, and we'll see you next time.